Everybody, welcome. I'm seeing the chat box. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining. We're excited to be having you here. I'll let Dr. Zainab take over. Yeah.
So I think you asked me to introduce myself, right? I think I'll do that first. Okay. So let me just put on my video while I do the introduction, and then I put it off while I start. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone from wherever you are joining this webinar. My name is Zainab Monisola Olaitan. I am a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Human Rights, University of Pretoria. I'm also a research associate with the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation at the University of Johannesburg. I completed my PhD in political science from the University of Pretoria, and I work at the intersection of gender and representation, just trying to locate women across different sectors on the African continent, and also center women across different sectors. So we look at technology, we look at finance, we look at gender budgetary response, we look at peace and security, we look at within the African Union system. So my research focuses on centering women and towards their development and also their self-determination. I will stop the introduction there so I don't waste your time. Thank you so much, everyone, once again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really a great introduction, and we are so excited to have you, Zainab, and we can't wait to tap into your knowledge and everything that you're gonna share. And welcome everybody. Those who are just joining us, welcome. If you like, you can switch on your video like what others are doing there. Yeah. I'm sorry, I can't switch on. We don't have power, so I'm really in the dark. Yeah. But yeah, yeah, I think we can just get straight into your presentation, Zainab, and then Chido can take it after that from that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I will share my slides. And then, okay, can everyone see the slides?
Yes, I can see them.
Okay, perfect. Once again, my name is Zainab Monisola. Ooh, did I just remove the slide? I think I just did. Apologies. Okay, my name is Zainab Monisola Olaitan. The title of my presentation today will be Overcoming Economic and Gender Challenges for Women's Development. So just a final check-in, can you hear me properly?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, to frame the conversation, my presentation will focus on how we can overcome gender and economic challenges for women's development. And in this presentation, I argue that to foster women's holistic well-being, we need to understand the multidimensional impediments that they face and the role that restrictive norms play. I start by providing a general overview of how restrictive norms are majorly responsible for women's woes. To demonstrate how these norms affect women's development, I use 5 thematic areas. So I use gender pay gap, I use financial inclusion, I use gender-based violence, gendered digital divide, and political participation. My discussion would also include relevant strategies to address these challenges to ensure women's holistic well-being and development. The discourse around gender equality in Africa, in whatever country that we are looking at, needs to be had from a flip side perspective, which is the current state of gender inequality and the urgent need for strategies to advance gender equality. The predominant culture in our society is patriarchal, such that raising discussion around the need for equality between genders spark debates on necessity and justification. However, the systemic and deep-rooted acts of violence against women and the underrepresentation of women in decision-making structures, gender, economic inequality, etc., are some of the many problems that bedevil women. This systemic manifestation of gender inequality find expression from different sources within the society, central of which is restrictive and harmful sociocultural norms and traditions. Gender discrimination is the tool through which these norms and traditions are used to perpetuate inequality between men and women. By stating that women are not allowed into certain spaces, or they should only be seen and not be heard, the entrenchment of gender inequality is born. Discrimination continues to be used to limit women's self-actualization, while also weaponized by religious and cultural norms to this end. In patriarchal societies, women are viewed as less than men, and gender roles are very rigid. Now, in this predominantly masculine society, women are given subordinate roles. Due to this rigidity, there are also limited roles that men and women can play as a result. So men are taught that housework like cooking, nurturing the home, or sweeping, fetching water are the preserve of women. Society's practices, conventions have historically generated and maintain these gender disparities. So it's literally like the systems and the institutions, they are all there to keep women inferior and women, reminding women that, okay, you don't belong. This system allows men to predominate in traditional, social, cultural, economic, and religious situations to reflect this patriarchal character, such that women are relegated to the domestic space, leaving them out of social, political, and economic spheres. Over the years, women have been subjected to oppression and subordination arising from this marginalization. Gender stereotypes are also a product of this system, wherein masculinity is synonymous with strength, while femininity is synonymous with weakness. These gender stereotypes are also used to deny women certain privileges or access to resources because of silencing of their agency outside of the home, negative power dynamics, and gender stereotype prevent women from engaging in certain activities or even proper access to healthcare services. In addition, women are not allowed access to sources of authority in the economy, politics, social sphere, or in any other sector. Now, the underrepresentation of women in the political system is a function of the restrictive patriarchal norms and tradition that prevents them from thriving in the public sphere. African feminists have sought to make sense of the limiting realities of African women due to the different structures of power that they are exposed to. Atanga states that African feminism, as demonstrated by Wangari Maathai, takes into account the history and diversity of Africa as well as colonialism. African feminism is focused on the realities and the difficulties that African women face on a daily basis, which might be linked to historical injustices. Philomena Steady explained that African feminism is a method African women have created and used to fight for their survival in a society that is bent on keeping them subjugated. She maintains that real feminism is the neglect of male protection and the development of resourcefulness and independence. Joseph Aichiri notes that the crucial part that gender plays in Africa's underdevelopment has been publicized due to African feminism. So we look at this background on how restrictive patriarchal norms manifest in different areas, and I move on to showing how they then manifest using the 5 thematic areas that I had earlier mentioned. So first, we have gender-based violence. I'll focus on gender-based violence first, because it's a very, very sad and precarious situation that women are exposed to on the African continent. Gender-based violence is structural and deeply ingrained in institutions, cultures, and traditions, making it a serious and pervasive issue that affects practically every facet of daily life. Patriarchy in most societies provide justification for situations that perpetuate harmful societal norms that lead to continued violence against women and girls. It starts by prescribing numerous patriarchal attributes that are tied directly to masculine social identities, which are often enforced by men, and the result being violence against women. So we can see the relationship between the restrictive patriarchal norms and how that then results in violence against women. This type of violence takes many forms and is rooted in women's political, economic, and social subordination. It is crucial to understand that women's experiences with this violence vary widely. since they are influenced not only by patriarchal institutions and practices, but also by other types of inequality and discrimination. Violence against women is a derivative of the unequal power relations between genders in our society, gender norms that govern expectation of the roles that women and men are expected to play in the family, in the community, at large, propagate violence as a means of restricting and limiting women's autonomy and agency. And I want us to take note of agency because I would stress on how it is important for women's development. These gender norms delineate the boundaries of acceptable behavior for men and women in the family and society within a given culture. Now, the vast majority of violence suffered by women and girls is often perpetrated by men and boys, whether as individuals or as part of a male-dominated institutions, despite the fact that they will say not all men are violent. However, the biological composition of being a man, which is the male sex, is not an adequate explanation for male violence against women, because there are differences in prevalence, patterns, and individuality between men in any setting. Hence, what we should blame is the social construction of masculinity as the culprit for men's perpetration of GBV. Though there are differences based on race, tribe, class, the dominant message about what a real man is emphasizes the superiority of masculinity over femininity. And we see that playing out in India, in Nigeria, in Gambia, in South Africa. Name any country and we see how, this superiority of masculinity plays out over femininity and the resulting impact on violence against women. Ideas about feminine weakness and masculine strength expose girls and women to more violence and reinforce the belief that masculine superiority, which is central to patriarchy. Violence is often used to then coerce women into obedience and uphold the hegemony of men over women. So when we see GBV is not the foundation. It is the manifestation of restrictive patriarchal religious and societal norms that keep women down and also perpetrate this violence. So when we want to address GBV, we need to address the stereotype, the norms that give power to gender-based violence. Now, when women try to assert their claims to power, for example, when they are involved in protest over economic and political rights, they are often verbally and physically attacked. Thus, GBV is maintained by ideas about and practices of hegemonic masculinity. By investigating the link between men's use of violence and social construction of masculinity, we discover that men are accorded more privilege than women, symbolizing that masculinity is given more priority over femininity. Now, violence against women is thus born out of the privilege that manifests from this unequal relation. Drawing from this, men feel entitled to use violence against those who are less than them because they fear the loss of such privilege or feel unable to live up to the expectation associated with being the dominant gender. Now, in most African societies, men are raised to be men. They are socialized into learning that violence is the way to demonstrate this masculinity and control women, often at great cost, not only to women and girls, but also to themselves. Violence against women constitutes a key manner of such control that prevents women from asserting their roles as individual with rights. Now, GBV is an important tool that consolidates the functionality of patriarchy, as it ensures that women are only seen in relation to men, which means their status as wife, mothers, daughters deprive them of their individual agency. I move on to the next thematic area, which is gender pay gap. And I'll be linking gender pay gap with women's financial inclusion. So the disparity between median salaries of men and women in a workspace is known as gender pay gap, despite the fact that the International Labour Organization Equal Remuneration Convention of 1951 is one of the most ratified conventions. Gender pay gap still exists. Consequently, the World Economic Forum forecasts that it will take 202 years to reduce the existing gender pay gap. Now, when we look at a case study of research on the South Africa's labor market wage gap, for instance, they have found consistently a persistent gender wage discrepancy. Many studies conducted in South Africa also revealed that there's a salary discrepancy between men and women, even when individual factors like education, age are taken into consideration. It has also been argued that men often occupy jobs in the management level, as well as among operators, assemblers, and trade employees. In turn, women predominate in professions like household work, clerking. The fact that men earn more than their female counterparts further consolidate the fact that women experience more wage discrepancies in formal employment. The gender wage gap's continued existence raises the potential of a stigma related to occupational feminization, meaning that work that is performed by women is socially and financially devalued. So we see things like secretaries, things like nurse, and how they are perceived in our society and how they are devalued in our society. There's a stereotype attached to jobs mostly occupied by women as being less valuable, which then affects the wage rates. Again, we see how patriarchal norms manifest in women's oppression, even in the workplace. These gendered jobs often pay less than those dominated by men, thereby reducing overall salaries for women relative to men. This occupational feminization can be found across different countries. Therefore, it is not even unique to Africa alone. Based on this, society devalues this job, but just because women perform them. And even in joking, like in normal social sphere, things that women engage in, hobbies that women engage in, we find that men also devalue them and also just speak down on them like, okay, this doesn't need much brain work. That is also a manifestation of, patriarchal norms. In addition to social pressures and convention, employers, governments, and trade unions must work to correct the gender pay gap. Now, compensation is frequently determined based on stereotypically masculine behaviors, including putting in long hours, working constantly for a long period, and negotiating aggressively. Some women suffer as a result of not following this convention. So now it is then important to stress that if women are not financially included, or if we don't achieve gender pay gap, we cannot achieve gender parity. And that's why I'm going to be talking about the link between gender pay gap and women's financial inclusion. Now, when we look at SDG 5 on gender equality, which emphasizes that women must have direct access to financial opportunities. Now, financial inclusion promotes opportunities for women to become entrepreneurs, business giants, independent philanthropists, and decision makers in the family and community. However, we find that women are excluded from financial services at the workplace and on a personal level compared to their male counterpart. According to feminist political analysis, the gender gap excludes women from economic activities and contributing to the country's socioeconomic growth, which also impacts their financial inclusion. This gap deprives them of their human rights and equal participation. Women in Africa, compared to women in the global north, for example, place their financial priority on meeting household needs rather than accumulating investment and savings. So women are traders, for example, when they make money, they use it for the house rather than for their own personal investment and savings. So we can see how women will continuously be financially excluded, because rather than using that money to probably invest and build their own financial profile, they invest it in their household and on their family. Now, women prioritize family due to many factors that primarily stem from social and cultural norms. Moreover, the majority are single-headed household heads, and those with partners would instead attend to the children and family responsibilities than indulge in other business opportunities. Women household responsibilities have financial consequences that may negatively affect their financial inclusion. Their lack of access to credit for women entrepreneurs, especially, is a major impediment to their financial inclusion. Women also constitute a large portion of informal economy because they are the primary entrepreneurs in Africa. However, their contribution, so the International Labour Organization, I don't know if you guys know this, they divided work into formal and informal. Now, the dichotomy that they created excludes women traders, especially African women traders who are known to engage in more traditional means of economic activity. So now the ILO dichotomy of formal and informal work literally excludes African women traders, and we see how this then perpetuates their financial exclusion. Now I move on to the next thematic area, which is gendered digital divide. The sociocultural factors that contribute to the digital gender inequality are becoming increasingly significant. African countries have significant gender disparities in digital device ownership and internet access. Now, in 22 countries, there's a gender gap of at least 10%. Even though access is increasing in most countries, there are still significant discrepancies between men and women. In comparison to other places, Africa still has a comparatively weak digital infrastructure. The gender gap in mobile phone ownership is most pronounced in South Africa at 26%, with gendered inequality in internet access remaining the biggest in the world's latest development at developed countries at 32.9%. Now, the lowest internet penetration rate worldwide for mobile broadband, the primary method of internet access for Africans, is roughly 25%. Moreover, Low and erratic electricity coupled with expensive data plans make it challenging for many to use the internet. Yesterday I spent almost 50 rands just getting 2 gigabytes of data. And trust me, MTN fapped it within 2 hours. And I was surprised. I'm like, why is this data too expensive? So those are some of like lived experiences of expensive internet data on the African continent. Now, there are ongoing gender discrepancies, which unquestionably called for more investigation. For instance, in the Republic of Congo, where 25% of women and 47% of men have access, the disparity exceeds 20%, which is about 22%. Now, this disparity is also particularly starting in the DRC, where only 14% of women and 35% of men claim to have access. The gender gap is at least 15% larger in countries like Senegal, Ghana, Nigeria. So there is unquestionably a lot of gender equality in access to and use of internet. Now, scholars have argued that the main obstacle to mobile internet access in Africa is smartphone ownership. So we then see now the intersectionality between women's gender pay gap, their male counterpart being paid more than them, their lack of financial inclusion, and their ability to even own smartphone, for example, or buy smartphone. So we need to note the links between these thematic areas. Now, due to 2 main factors, their lower educational attainment and in part lower average earnings, women continually have less access to the internet and mobile devices than men. So I move on to the last thematic focus, which is women's underrepresentation in the political system. Now, the political representation of women in Africa has to an extent enjoyed a boost. So we see countries like Senegal, countries like Ethiopia, countries like Rwanda, South Africa, they are raising the continental average, while certain countries have increased women political participation. In other countries, women hold less than 20% of political positions. In fact, among women ministers, the most common portfolio that they give women, you see them, Minister for Women and Children, Minister for Disability, Minister for Social Welfare. They don't give women important things like Minister for Defense, Finance, Economy, Petroleum, and so forth. Now, demonstrating that women are often given tokenistic positions, therefore not accorded a place of prominence in politics and governance, particularly in Africa. For instance, when we look at countries like Ghana and Nigeria, they really, really lag behind in terms of gendered aspect of governance. For Ghana, for example, as of 2015, women only made up 13%. And Nigeria, as at the last election that we had last year, we only have 6% of women represented in our political system, which is very, very, very shameful. Based on data compiled by Afrobarometer in 2021, on women's political participation on the continent, they report that women constitute an average of 24% of 12,113 parliamentarians in Africa, 25% in the lower house and 20% in the upper house. While at the local government level, they constitute a mere 21% of councillors. Women, and I note now the nuance around age, young women and women from marginalized groups report that they have difficulty engaging in or influencing the policy process in their countries. They face a variety of barriers to their participation in politics, and we know what these barriers are. Now, the Afrobarometer stats have been updated in 2024. The average for women's representation is at 26%. So meaning from 2021 to 2024, there was only a 5%, was that 5%? Yeah, only a 5% increase, right? Which is, which is still less than 30%, which is the critical mass established by the Beijing Platform for Women. So now, for instance, we have countries like Nigeria, Ghana, Botswana, Sudan, Eritrea, many more that have less than 20%. The problem is that some countries don't have quotas, which they call temporary special measures, to drive increased women's participation. While some countries that have, they literally set tokenistic targets that are below 30%. For instance, Niger and Djibouti both set their reserve seats below 20%, which does not bode well for increased women's representation. So countries, like I said, some countries don't have quotas, while others have, and they don't translate to increased numbers. So now we move on to strategies. How do we then overcome these challenges? Because I've been talking about the challenges that women face as a result of the manifestation of restrictive patriarchal norms. How do we overcome these challenges? So the first one, we look at, I will start again from gender-based violence because that was the first thematic area I focused on. So for gender-based violence, for example, at the root of GVV, we look at resocialization. Remember, I talked about the social construction of masculinity. So it's not that when a male child is born, automatically that male child inculcates patriarchal norms. No. It is the process of socialization that they're exposed to when they are growing up that makes them imbibe these norms. And that process is what sociologists will call resocialization. Now, sociologists have also then coined a term of resocializations to address restrictive norms. At the root of GBV lies patriarchy, gender stereotype, and harmful societal practices, and therefore the resocialization of society is necessary. It should particularly focus on men. Resocialization is defined as a process of tearing down and rebuilding an individual's role and socially constructed sense of self. Socially constructed sense of self. It is often a deliberate and intense social process because it revolves around the notion that if something can be learned, it can be unlearned. The resocialization process of men and boys should focus on unlearning the negative traits of masculinity they have been taught while embracing positive masculinity, which should introduce them to their new role as participants for change. This entails explaining the negatives of the present socialization process that contributes to violence against women while reorienting them on the new traits of masculinity that will help them become participants for change. Other strategies for addressing GBV would also be collaboration. So oftentimes we look at female MPs that, okay, what are women politicians doing? They should do something about GBV. But the research I conducted for my doctoral research shows that the problem of GBV is more endemic and systemic and institutional, such that female MPs can literally not make impactful, critical impact on it. Therefore, there is need for collaboration. Female MPs, male MPs, institutions, and systems need to come together to address GBV. We also look at strengthening institutions. So on the corrective side, for example, when a rapist is arrested, we need to strengthen the security and justice system, and it needs to be well-resourced to be trained to deal with GBV issues. There was a case recently about the girl in Ethiopia that was murdered by a rapist, and the rapist is in jail calling for reduced sentence and also threatening. Those are the kind of issues that we need strong institutions to address. We also need a database of GBV cases, because for every GBV case that is reported, there are 10 that go unreported, and that is a problem. So we need an up-to-date database to capture GBV cases, and police need to be trained, gender training on how to address GBV. Then we'll move to women empowerment, because the issue of economic dependence on their partners or men is also contributing, because you can't be dependent on somebody, and when you are a victim of abuse from that person, it is difficult for you to live. However, when you are financially included, when you have your own finances, it is much more easier. I wouldn't say it is easier totally, but it's much more easier to leave that space of abuse. We look at what can we do for gender digital divide. So now we also need stakeholders and researchers to pay more care and attention to the divide. And now, what are the things we can do? First, policies that give more women the opportunity to pursue job in tech from the time they are young girls to the time they are professionals. This thing of when you are raising a girl child, they are telling her, don't study engineering, don't study this, go for easy courses like nursing, so that when you get married, you don't have to stress your marriage. We need to encourage girls to go for STEM. They should go. Let us saturate STEM so that women can create much more gender friendly research on how we can then correct the digital divide. We also have the need for collaboration again. Collaboration is essential for addressing resource and policy gap. The importance of this collaboration among stakeholders is to address the inequality. Hence, government, private sector, and tech leaders must come together to devise means to facilitate women's access and encourage their use. We also need to look at women in underserved regions and rural areas. We shouldn't just focus on the urban areas, because the number of women that have access to internet in rural areas will be significantly lower than those in the urban areas. So we also need to focus on women and girls in the rural areas. Now, for women's representation in the political system, we look at temporary special measures, and there have been research that shows that countries that adopt temporary special measures called quotas, they have more women in their political system. Now, I'm sure some of you will be thinking, but what is the point of having many women if they don't make impact? And I say, please leave them there. Let them go there. Let them go, because nobody is asking the impact that male politicians have had on the African continent. Look at the state of Africa. Men have been ruling this continent and they've ruined this continent, but nobody bases the justification for their inclusion into politics on the impact they have had on this continent. You don't ask a female politician, what have you done? And then I'll vote for you. We just vote for them because we think it is their reserve. So let us put those women there. And then we now also look for other consolidative way to address women's issues. So we look at quotas. We look at countries like South Africa at 45%, Rwanda at 61.3%, Senegal at 50%. Quotas have worked, right? So we need to then enjoin other countries to adopt our quotas. And then my general conclusion, which is where I bring the puzzle together, all of these strategies. So what are some of the principles that would underpin these strategies? As we find pathways for overcoming economic and gender challenges that impede women's development, it is important that we center agency. Remember at the beginning, I talked about the importance of agency. Agency underpins the ability of women to make informed and independent decisions for themselves. However, what we see is that women's agency have been eroded in the face of restrictive patriarchal norms and societal attitudes based on gender stereotypes. These norms dictate what women can and cannot do, thereby limiting their well-being, quality of life, and self-actualization. There is need to underscore the power of agency for the actualization of women's self-determination and their holistic well-being. If women are unable to make decisions that better their lives, issues around their well-being and development will become unattainable. Also, it is important to have feminist leaders who are conscious of the plight of women. Feminist leadership responds to patriarchal and traditional power structure that dominate society. It empowers women to challenge these restrictive norms that bifurcates genders into hierarchies. To have women with a feminist consciousness in politics, for example, makes it easy to challenge existing stereotype while advancing women's rights. Also, we need to understand the nuance that exists among this thematic area, which then can manifest in violence against women. Lastly, we must take an intersectional approach to addressing the challenges that impede women's development, because it is impossible, for example, to correct the gender digital divide without ensuring women's financial inclusion. Neither will we be gender equal if women continue to be underrepresented in the political system and are continuously victim of GBV. All these problems are interconnected and interrelated. Hence, an intersectional approach is key. In conclusion, finally, I borrow from Thomas Sankara's quote that reads, "Our revolution is not a public speaking tournament. Our revolution is not a battle of fine phrases. Our revolution is not simply for spouting slogans that are no more than signals used by manipulators trying to use them as catchwords, as code words, as a fall for their own display. Our revolution is and should continue to be the collective effort of revolutionaries to transform the reality, to improve the concrete situation of women in our society." And I thank you. I end my presentation.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Zainab. This was really an amazing presentation, a very insightful one. And thank you so much. Thank you so much. When you were actually speaking, it was actually like coming from a place of passion, a place of being worried, a place of, wanting to better the situation and the challenges that women are facing in this African continent. And thank you so much for talking about the gender pay gap. It's something that is really, really crazy, gender-based violence. Thank you for putting the information across. And yeah, Chido, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, you can carry on in the next section.
Okay, yeah, welcome to our question and answer session. My name is Chido Kunaga. I'm the Learning and Development Coordinator, co-moderating with Ruarashe. Everyone is free to pose a question, and our guest, Dr. Zainab, is going to help us with imparting knowledge. If one may have a question, he or she can raise a hand.
If you can also, unmute yourself if you want to speak, or you can do that as well. I'm sure the information that has been shared has posed a lot of questions, in our minds. And yeah, if there is any takeaway you need to share, you can just unmute yourself and then speak.
Okay. Hi, it's evening here. Good evening. Well done, Dr. Zainab. That was amazing. Thank you so much for all those linkages. And I think mine is more of a contribution than a question, really. And it's about resocialization. When you were speaking about socialization, gender transformation came to my mind, right? Because recently I was thinking about the gender continuum, and yeah, gender transformation came to my mind because I also think that I think gender transformation incorporates resocialization in shifting gender norms. And I think gender transformation might be more structural, while resocialization is at perhaps personal and community level. So if there's a way you can help me also like draw a linkage between resocialization and gender transformation and just norm shifting at the structural level generally. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. We can go to another question if someone has a question.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. So I was wondering, how do you view the progress of gender quotas in African politics over the past 30 years, particularly in Botswana and South Africa? And what stories of success could you tell us that we could maybe use in other African countries who face a lot of issues with getting women into politics?
Hello, Dr. Zainab.
Are those all the questions?
Okay, can you come again?
I'm asking, are those all the questions? So I just take those two and then, or we wait for one more, so I take all of them at once.
Oh, okay. We can wait for more, then you can take them all.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, then I can pose another question.
Okay.
Okay, so what advice would you give to young African women aspiring to enter the fields of politics, academia, or activism?
Okay. So I would
Sorry.
take the question.
Yeah, sorry, can I ask?
to
Yes,
yes, you can.
please. Can I ask just one question? And it's about
Okay.
when we were talking about strengthening the capacity of the police and law enforcement agency to respond to GBV. And the report GBV NG platform by the Ministry of Women's Affairs came to my mind, right? And I remember how useful that platform was for me, or has been for me. But if you check that platform now, it's no longer like working. And when I spoke to one of the people who sort of worked to put it up, they said it's because of funding, like resourcing, what should be the government's work, using like NGO, international like funders to resource data collection on GBV. So I'm wondering, what are the ways that, I don't know, as civil society, we can navigate, I don't know, we can navigate all these bureau cases, right? For I don't know, just a proper structural response to GBV, because that was so disappointing for me. I think perhaps I've just been looking for a platform to speak about it, because that used to be like the most reliable source of data on GBV cases in Nigeria. And now it no longer exists because funding has ceased. So there's no sustainability for even when we train police, when we train law enforcement agencies, and they move them to some, like, I think sustainability is just a major issue in Nigeria when it comes to responding to cases, when it comes to documenting cases, and even getting justice for cases. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I would take the questions in the order that they were posed. So first on resocialization and gender transformation. So I do agree with you, Toby, that resocialization is much more at the individual level, at the family unit, like the individual process. However, we then need to see it as a sort of like it builds up. So a drop in the bucket, then it comes together to become either like a tank or like one huge water system. So when each family unit, or in each family unit, engage in the process of resocialization, then that builds up into gender transformation, because we can't take gender transformation from the top and forget that it starts from the home. So for example, if I train my male child that, okay, you don't see women as inferior, but if the other person still telling their son that you are the boss, you are the oga, then we don't have a gender transformative society. However, we need everyone to be involved in resocialization process at the home, at the school, at the religious homes, because we shouldn't underestimate the power of people learning things outside of the home. So even if I'm telling my child in the home that, oh yeah, women are equal to you, treat them well, just as you would treat, and then in their friend's house, or they go to their friend's house, or amongst their peers, or in their school, they are still perpetuating those hegemonic masculine traits, then we still won't have a gender transformative society. So before we look at the formal structures of transforming gender relations, let us start from, changing the socialization of male-dominated institutions, or even men generally. And also, let's remember that there are also the entrenchment of masculinity into institutions. And it's because people make up institutions, people make up norms, people make up rules, people make up policies and legislations, and their personal biases reflect in the policies they have created. So if you have a man who thinks a woman is inferior to him and is the head of one policy research agency or one agency, for example, whatever kind of policies or legislation, or even thinking that it creates for that organization, it will reflect its personal bias, and that's very dangerous. And that's why we need to recognize the importance and necessity of starting from the bottom while also consolidating efforts at the top. So now I move on to the next one, which is progress of quotas in SA and Botswana and lessons for other African countries. And I would use SA, Senegal, Rwanda, Uganda as some of examples. So we have Uganda at reserved seats. So reserved seats is, okay, this number of seats, only women would occupy it. We also have legislated quotas, which countries like Botswana, Senegal particularly, because in 2010 they passed a gender parity law that required that 50% of political offices must be occupied, and that is constitutional. So if they don't have 50% of women, meaning they are going against their constitution. Now we have countries like South Africa at voluntary quotas, or what we call party quotas, where political parties are the one that ensure that, okay, we must have gender parity. So you have your ANC, your EFF, your BCP in Botswana also having quotas. So for ANC, they do 50%, EFF does 50%, BCP in Botswana does 30%. So now when we look at these different forms of quotas, and we see how these countries that have named have more than 30% women in their political system. So the trick is that as much as people want to downplay quotas, I am up for quotas, because please give me a much more intentional way of closing the gender gap in our political system. Because if you say women should contest election like men, have you seen our society? Like, have you seen what they say about female politicians in our society? They can't even get past the entrance, talk less of getting a seat into the room. I'm not even saying at the table, because there are levels to this marginalization. First, they can't even get into the compound. We are all Africans. We know what compound is. Before they even get into the room and get a seat at the table. So quotas allow for the dismantling of the barriers to allow them, women, to then get into the room. Like, let's even get them. And that's why I'm up for quotas. And I'm also up for quotas that are party-backed and also constitutionally protected, because parties are also funny. Because they've put women in power, they want women to do their bidding. And that's why we create patriarchal princesses in politics, for example, women that do the bidding of their parties. So as much as I'm calling for quotas, I'm also calling for quotas that are constitutionally backed. That way, women are not loyal to parties, but they are loyal to the country. And then we can also have feminist political leaders who can then fight for women. Like we saw the Kenyan woman who was very vocal in parliament, for example, and telling the men, you know what, I don't care. I'm going to say what I want to say. A woman that knows that our chances of re-election is based on if our party nominates her the next time, she's likely not to see anything that goes against the powers that be in her party. So those are some of the nuances around quotas. And we also need to be mindful as we implement quotas, right? But I say yes to quotas because when we look at evidence on the continent, countries that use quotas, they have gone far behind. And countries like Nigeria that are saying, let's focus on competency. We only have 6%, which is like, they use the competency argument to say, we don't want quotas, we want to advance meritocracy. But deep down, women will never make it past when we only say, because quotas doesn't even mean we are bringing in incompetent women. These women are very much confident. We are just saying that we need to remove the barrier that prevents these competent women from entering into the room, because the only basis for women's exclusion in any sector is on the basis of their gender. It's not because they are not qualified. It's not because they are younger. It's not because they are stupid. It's just the gender. In STEM, in finance, in the economy, in politics, name it. And that's why we say yes to quotas, because it allows them to then overcome that barrier. And that's what other African countries can learn from. Now, advice to young, I'll take that last, because that would then be like a very nice closure to the to my talk. So findings and ways CSOs can navigate bureaucracies for proper GBV response. See, when it comes to GBV, I did talk about a collaborative effort is important, but we also see that the government is the major enemy to addressing gender-based violence sometimes. Because the kind of things they do, you just look like, are you actually serious about addressing gender-based violence? Because you say, okay, go report GBV. From the police officers, they look very untrained. And interestingly, they also perpetuate GBV at home. So please, how can I go and report to somebody that does the same thing that I'm about to report to them? Now, government will say, we can't do it alone. We need the help of CSOs. But the funding, they don't provide. Now, they also frustrate civil society efforts. The bureaucracies is just crazy. To register an NGO in Nigeria is more stressful than to register a profit-making business. And I've had the experience. To register a business that makes profits is easier than registering an NGO. They will ask you to bring things that, like, before you even then properly register the NGO, another problem is funding. Or, okay, I'm working on creating policies to address, let's get the Minister of Women Affairs. Can you even reach her? That's the first question. Do you even have access to this woman? Will she even come to your event? Those are the issues. So we look at funding, we look at collaboration with political leaders, and we look at how wishy-washy they are, for example. And they're very wishy-washy. Like Toby said, there's no sustainability in these strategies. And that's why I really commend CSOs that work on the African continent. They are God's strongest soldiers. And I don't know how they do it. The fact that they keep putting in the effort to ensure that women are able to use their voices. Because it is very stressful working with government that are not serious about the advancement of the country that they are governing. Now, finally, advice to women that want to go into politics or other areas. I would say, go for it. Go for it. You are very smart. You have what it takes. You see that voice in your head that is saying, what if you fail? Auntie, go and fail. Go inside there and fail. It is in the process of trying and trying again, you would actually learn something. I was telling myself today that I feel like women should know that there's nothing you cannot learn. And you need to have the audacity of a white man. My sisters, have the audacity of a white man. White men, they go into the room like they know everything in the world, even if they know nothing. And trust me, audacity gets you somewhere. Audacity, because people would not know that you don't know anything. They would have opened the door, you would have entered before they now know, okay. Because for somebody to know you don't know anything, they will need to engage you for like, 2 to 3 minutes, right? But imagine you are shy. When you are shy in the fair, they're like, okay, this one. But you're like, yes, my name is this, I'm here, They would have given you the audience. And it's that audience we need. We need to get into the room. So please, act with the audacity of a white man. And please, then back it up with substance. Back it up with substance, because it's the substance that then keeps you in the room for a long time. And I'll stop my responses there.
Thank you so much. I love everything that you said. I relate to it very much on an academic level, but also on a personal level. And I agree that getting into the room, pushing can get you there, but staying there requires honing skills. So I really respect that. Thank you so much for your time. Really great.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Is there anyone with a question? Oh, you're done for today. I think there is no one, so I can give the closing remarks. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our guest, Dr. Zainab, for joining us on our webinar. Thank you for the insightful presentation. We have learned that women should be included in all walks of life holistically, and women should also be vocal and strong to make it. Thanks to everyone who have managed to join us. Thanks once again for the support. We can call it a day, and good night, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for joining. Thank you so much.
Yes,
Thank
thank you for your time. Goodbye.